Welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating, from the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day. Each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. Well, today we were supposed to have two guests, but that isn't happening. So for the entire show, we're going to get to talk with Derrel Sims about two different topics. In the first hour, we're going to be talking about handwriting analysis, and he is a forensic handwriting analyst, and so we're going to talk about handwriting in general as well as the use by like government law enforcement agencies and stuff like that. So that should be pretty cool because we've never done a show about handwriting analysis. And in the second hour, we're going to be speaking about hypnosis, and not just regular hypnosis, even though we're going to talk about that also, but we're going to be talking about hypnosis of people who have claim to have alien abductions. So, should be interesting. But here's a few announcements before we get Derrel on the air. As you recall, Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com. That's soulhealer.com. And the Institute of Applied Energetics, appliedenergeticsinstitute.com. So please do check out those websites and see all the things that are available. If you'd like to keep informed of the upcoming guests we have on the show, please do go to the Just Energy Radio webpage. That's www.justenergyradio.com, and sign up for our weekly newsletter. You can also access our almost 5 years worth of archives. I do have a number of events coming up that are going to be very cool. One, if you're in the Dallas area, generically Dallas area, this one I think is really important. There's an event called Paranormal Kick Cancer, and it's a fundraiser to help children who are suffering from cancer and getting them some money. There's going to be lectures all day. I'll be there giving a presentation. And in the evening, they're going to be doing an investigation of Hill House Manor. I hear it's a pretty spooky spot. That's happening on September 24th in Gainesville, Texas. I think it starts at 10 o'clock in the morning and then goes to who knows how late at night. But that's the 24th, and that's Paranormal Kick Cancer. Then on October 8th and 9th in Austin, Texas, is the Central Texas Paranormal Conference. Should be a lot of fun. I'll be there, and Jeff Bellinger will be there. The Kling brothers will be there. Fiona Broom will be there, and a good friend of the show, Dash Beardsley, the ghost man from Galveston. That's October 8th and 9th. Their webpage is ctparacon.com for more information and tickets. October 25th through 30th is the 2011 ASPE Paranormal Symposium being held this year in Taos, New Mexico. And so whether you want to go to the conference or not, you could go and hang out in Taos, hang out with me, get a reading. It should be fun. Lots of people that we've had on the show before. Larry Flaxman's going to be there. Our good friend Jerry Pippin of jerrypippin.com will be there. And some new friends, Scotty Roberts and Edmund Gomez, are going to be there. Their webpage is aspesymposium.com. That's aspesymposium.com. And then one of my favorite shows is coming up, because it is that time of the year, that Halloween spooky time, is the History, Haunts, and Legends Conference in, obviously, spooky, Jefferson, Texas. And that's being held on November 5th. I'll be there. I don't know who all else is speaking, but it's always a great event. Lectures all day, a ghost walk at night, and investigations until the wee hours of the morning. That is November 5th, and that the webpage for that is jeffersonghostwalk.com. So let me tell you a little bit about Derrel and get him on the air, because we have a lot to talk about. Derrel Sims is a certified hypnotic anesthesia therapist, certified master hypnotherapist, certified medical hypnotist, and has a master's level in Neuro Linguistic Programming. He has trained extensively in many disciplines, including linguistics, handwriting analysis, and timeline therapy. He worked in 2 hypnotherapy clinics for 4 years. Cases range from phantom limb phenomena, manic depression, bipolar, anger management issues, alcoholism, smoking habits, weight issues, double amputees with severe pain on morphine, and missing extremities. So this sounds so incongruent, but I'm going to say it anyway. From alienhunter.org, please welcome to Just Energy Radio, Derrel Sims. Hey, Derrel, how are you?
Hello. Oh, how are you? Good to hear from you.
I'm good. Derrel, we know you as the Alien Hunter, underline, exclamation point. But today we're going to be talking to you about handwriting analysis and hypnotherapy. You are a man of many talents. How did you... I'm a little confused, were you doing hypnotherapy and handwriting analysis first? Were you an alien hunter first? How does this all fit into the big Derrel picture?
Well, it all fits in by the fact that I'm to back up a little bit, my investigations in the UFO field were spurred on by my interest simply because of my own experiences in 1952 at age 4 when some entity came in my room, and that started my quest, and my UFO abductions events occurred for 13 years and ended violently when I was age 17, and no other event existed afterward. Then my son got abducted about 6 years old, and that started my quest as the alien hunter. In other words, you can mess with me and I can deal with it. You mess with my children and I'll come after you. And so that changed me from a UFO abductee to somebody that hunts the prey. Now, they hunted us, and now I'm hunting them. The bottom line is that my former background is a senior military police officer for 3 years in the military, and I worked in the Central Intelligence Agency in covert operations for 2 years. And in the course of all of that, all this simply means that this brings I bring to the UFO field a heavy investigative background from police work, and I've been a private investigator in the state of Texas for nearly 30 years now. So that's my interest, and I always continue to enhance my skills in handwriting analysis, which I've done for about 15 years, and hypnosis and many other skills for literally for many years. Because a lot of places I go, like other countries as an example, you have to be able to question and talk to people and be able to figure out whether they're lying or telling the truth or know something about them, even though you don't even speak their language. You have to be able to read people extremely well, and you have to do it fast because sometimes you'll have 15, 20, or in case of Brazil, we had about 250 people lined up one afternoon. And they all wanted to talk to me, and I mean, like, wow, and with a translator, that takes a while to do.
When you talk about telling a lie or telling the truth, are you talking about walking up to a person and being able to read that person, or are you talking about using handwriting analysis for that purpose?
Well, we've got an amusing story to answer that 2 ways. The first way was... when I was in Brazil, I took a doctor with me and on our staff, and interestingly enough, we had some news people there with their crew, and they said this lady came up. She waited in line with there must have been 220 some people in a line after my presentation wanting to talk. And there's 2 or 3 news services there with the cameras and everything, and they waited in line as well. And this one lady came up, and she was very, very ugly about the people involved in these events. And she said, "Now, don't you think that a lot of these people are standing behind me, that those are people who are all just crazy and they're making all this up and so on and so on and so on?" And I said, I actually teach college courses on how to determine whether people are lying or telling the truth just by monitoring them. And I said, I also know how to do handwriting analysis, and in fact, I could do that right now. And then she kept going on, and she says, it's all a bunch of bull. And I said, well, rather than attack everybody else, why don't we just look at your handwriting? So I grabbed her notes out of her hand while the camera's going and went through her handwriting, and I said, oh, my gosh, sexual repression? I wonder what that's all about. And
on camera.
I said, if you think I'm making any of this up, lady, I said, you can challenge me at any time. And needless to say, that was a very brief meeting. The next group that came through, another TV group, they all had their handwriting done for me and handed it to me. And I said, I don't want to look at your handwriting. I was just not impressed with the lady calling everyone a liar that she had never met. I mean, you have to be a pretty good psychic to be able to look out at the crowd and say, oh, all those people are lying. That's either a psychic or you're just making it up yourself, and you're the liar. So I just didn't buy into what she was doing, and I didn't like it. So that ended that very quickly for her. But I was right about her handwriting. I didn't make it up.
So the lesson to this story is if you see Derrel at a conference, make sure you don't have any notes.
Well, if you're going to accuse people of lying and you have no basis for it, that's I just think that's just so awful to accuse people of stuff and not have the slightest clue. Not even the slightest clue for what's happened, and it's just to assume that everybody's lying because you don't agree with them. That's some pretty radical stuff, in my opinion.
There are a lot of people that recognize handwriting analysis as, I'm going to say, a form of entertainment. Just to here, tell me something about myself, kind of like getting a reading. Aren't there other things that it is used for, like more technical, scientific-y kind of things?
Well, of course, you can use handwriting analysis as an example to be very serious about this. First, for instance, if you're looking for a serial killer, as an example, and you find pieces of his handwriting or parts of that handwriting, someone who's very good at this, and there are people who specialize in these. And handwriting, like many things, has its own divisions and own fields. You have specialists that do document examination, for instance, so they can look at documents and tell you whether they're accurate or not, and so on and so on. There are different levels of that. But the fact is that in a case like a person who is you're looking for a serial killer, or I'll give you a personal example. A friend of mine got a letter in the mail from this individual, and who wrote in red letters. And after he printed it, and he sent this picture of someone getting their head blown off with a pistol. And then it was just terrible, the picture that they had done. And the picture was obviously created on computer, but the point was that was the message in and it was just a picture and just the writing on the outside of the envelope. We determined a huge amount of information about this individual just by looking at the handwriting, the printing on the outside of the letter, the coloration of the printing, and I mean, it was just incredible. And I used a number of people who were experts in more so than myself, and I took it to them, got their opinion, and I'd take it to other people and get their opinion, until finally we made some pretty good determinations about it, and even even in our opinion, have a fair description of what the guy actually looks like.
So what kind of things did you come up with?
Well, I'm trying to pull up on my computer here some information for you, and I hopefully will have that in a moment. But in his case, the guy wrote in red, and he is very passionate. The slant of his handwriting told us a great deal about himself. He was a loner. He's someone who demanded that people pay attention to him, and he was going to get attention one way or another. And this really upset of course, my friends, because his husband and wife, because they didn't know anybody at all who could do this sort of thing and send a letter like this to them and scare them half to death. It was most disconcerting for them, and I thought it was pretty fascinating. Of course, that's awful to have to say that, but that's the way I think. I mean, I think it's fascinating that we got that letter and that we got that data and that information off of them. And there again, if you didn't have someone to do handwriting analysis on that, you wouldn't be able to determine literally who did it or what their purpose might have been. So handwriting was probably the only way to even begin to detect who that might be and what to look for. And even some of his physical characteristics showed up in the handwriting as well.
It also sounds like you were able to tell that this person might actually try to make another communication with them or keep, escalating what was going on because of his passion and determination to be heard or recognized, which would scare the crap out of me.
Oh, yes. Rita, this is, I'll give you just a few things we found about him right off the bat. He wanted to be important. He wanted his own gratification. 2 separate philosophies from both parents. In other words, they both affected him, and he's incorporated their philosophies, and it's created a really messed up individual. He's eccentric and intentional. He works alone, very detailed, and some of the more bizarre particulars about the guy is he's very loyal to his own ideals, although tactful, he actually feels inadequate, and will try to gain ego support by adding showy touch to one's behavior, pretending that everything is under control, which obviously it isn't in his case. He is a very dependent personality, very sensitive to disapprovals or criticisms. He expects others to yield first place in everything. This person thinks first, last, and foremost of himself. The person should be avoided, obviously, because he's just the type person that kind of a play misty for me type person. Once you get him in your life, you're not going to get rid of him.
Fine. Did they ever figure out who this guy was?
Well, no. I don't know the particulars concerning the police aspect of the case because it was in another state and didn't have anything to do with me other than it was a friend, and they sent me the original letter and information and the pictures, and I did the handwriting analysis from that with my other colleagues, and that was what we were able to determine minimally off of. There was a lot more that we were able to determine, even some physical characteristics of the individual, but the bottom line is that's pretty much it. And no further contact has been made, in my understanding, so the individual may have backed off when he found out we were involved in the case as well.
Interesting. One of the things that you made while you were kind of describing his personality was that you were able to determine the philosophy of his parents, both mother and father. How the heck can you determine something like that in someone's handwriting?
Well, it shows up in the capital I in the signature. When a person starts writing, you can tell a good deal about the mother or the father and their influence in the person's life. And this gives you a huge hint in that respect. There are other things you're looking at as well. You don't just look at the letters. You actually look at the slant. You look at the pressure. You look at the every stroke, literally, on that paper is evidence. So it's not just a letter means this, or it leaned that way, so it means that. It's much more than that. That's a very simplistic aspect of handwriting analysis. And I'll give you even another example. One of the things I do as a private investigator is to help people get money back they've unfortunately lent people or given to people, and they should have never done. And such a lady wrote me here a while back and asked me if I'd investigate her case. I agreed to, and she had gone to a meeting, a real highbrow meeting, where a guy pitched his specialty services and joint venture work and so on and so on. Long story short is he clipped this elderly lady out of $118,000. And naturally he didn't return the money, so she hired me, and I contacted him and said, I'd like for you to return, my client would like for you to return her money as you promised because you didn't deliver. He basically said, make me. And I said, I'm glad you're not returning the money, I said, because what I do now, I get to do what I really do well. He said, what's that? And I said, I'm going to put you away for 10 years. How's that? And he said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, first of all, the two signatures on the document. He said, that's Mr. Harris, and that's the one, the other one's me. And I said, no, they're both you. I did the handwriting analysis on both, and that's forgery. That's the first felony. That's your first one. That's the second one is we're going after you for what you did to her and the misrepresentation. Long story short, I got a felony charge against him, a second-degree felony, to begin with, just on the evidence I turned into the Economic Crimes Division, Harris County DA. And they accepted the case, and the guy ended up losing his house, his wife, and, of course, he's going to jail, and this is federal now. If we got one more person that we can find he cheated like this, it's going to bump up to a RICO charge, and he's going to do maximum time. So that handwriting, the two detectives who looked at when I filed my detective report to them, they said it's one of the best cases they'd ever seen, and they were just delighted because they didn't have to do any investigating. They said, you did the whole thing? I said, that's what you paid me for. I said, I used to be a cop, so I know what you need. He said, the handwriting was incredible. He said, we were stunned at how easily you got that guy. He printed one signature and wrote the other one, and you caught it anyway. I said, it's the same guy. Same exact guy.
That sounds like so impossible to me. Like if you had one signature that looked like John Hancock's writing and then another one that looked like mine, which isn't really writing, that you could tell that it was the same person.
Well, first of all, there were two reasons I knew that was his signature. The first one is a no-brainer. Only two people were in the room, her and him. And there's three signatures on the document, hers and two men. So who do you think did the other two signatures? Well, he did them both. The second thing is that since I had had eyewitness that he was in the room doing the signatures, it was pretty obvious that he did it. The second thing is I just needed to be able to prove that in court. And I didn't have to prove it in court. The DA was sufficiently impressed with the evidence that I did present, and I presented not only my handwriting skill on the event, but through someone else, and as a result, he ended up getting a second-degree felony against him.
And so the thing would kind of hold true for a forgery case.
Sure, and I'll give you an example of that. Recently, a young lady wrote me, and which I preferred she write me in handwriting, and she did, and that was her first mistake. And she wrote me and said that there was a forgery in their family concerning the will. And I looked at the will, checked it over, had another analyst look at it as well, independent of me, because I like to verify everything I do. And long story short, she's the one that forged the will. Of course. And what was a dead giveaway, Dr. Rita, was right off the bat, was there were liar loops in her handwriting, probably about as many as I've ever seen in anyone's handwriting. So I knew she was not truthful to begin with. and then I saw resentment strokes in her handwriting. So that these are just telltale signs. You need to be looking at her first. She's the person of interest. And the second problem was when I looked at the document itself. Again, you can change your handwriting and do all kinds of fun things, but the problem is certain strokes are going to keep reoccurring, and that's the giveaway. I don't care how you try to change it. If you're doing, and she wrote the whole document in handwriting, and unfortunately, and then of course signed her deceased father's name to it. That was another giveaway. It wasn't his signature. It's close. To someone who didn't know it would be his signature, but it wasn't to me, and it wasn't to my other analyst. Long story short, that thing was thrown out of court.
I'm looking on the board to make sure my mom's not listening to the show. So even though I practiced really hard copying her signature growing up, you know, and it looked pretty good. I thought it looked pretty good. You'd be able to tell that it was a fake.
It is very possible. And again, there are just telltale signs that'll give that away.
It's interesting. I was just talking to Aaron Houdini, the great-grandnephew of Harry Houdini, and he had was telling me the story about being in a police station, you know, breaking out, of course, because that's what he does. And he had signed his autograph to a poster, I guess, and the officer walked off with it and apparently compared it to an original Houdini signature and told him that it was 98% accurate. So is that like an astronomical comparison that can happen? Does that happen?
There are people who can, you can match, most people that do forgeries on signatures will copy, there are different ways you can do that, and they'll usually have a copy of someone's exact signature underneath, and they can see it like through a glass, and they'll just simply trace over it. That's most of the stuff is done. Now, the other way to do that is to mimic, to try to, you know, do the signature itself several hundred times or a dozen times until you get pretty proficient at it, and then that'll pass a lot of people. The problem is whenever you start comparing that signature and their handwriting, you start seeing little telltale signs that give it away. I mean, it's just not beyond detection.
Earlier, you were talking about being able to tell if somebody is lying using handwriting analysis. How do you do that?
Well, there are different things you're going to be looking for. You're looking for whether or not that they're deceptive, whether or not they have self-deceit in their handwriting, whether or not they are secretive, whether or not they some of these things they're not necessarily negative traits, they're actually positive traits. And for instance, if you don't have big secrecy loops in your handwriting, probably you're not going to be a real good person to hire as a case officer or a spy for the Central Intelligence Agency, because you're not going to be able to keep secrets. In other words, if you have an O, like DOG, an O there in the middle, you have an O and it's open at the top. You know, it didn't come together quite. It's open. Well, that openness at the top of that O, that's a communication letter, and it shows that you like to talk a lot. Now, is that good or bad? Well, it's good if you're a salesperson. It might be bad if you had state secrets.
Good point.
So there are all kinds of things. If diplomacy shows up in your handwriting, like you see an M as an example, an M and the first hump is a little high, second hump's a little lower, and third hump is a little lower than that. So it's kind of slanting towards your right. Well, that is called diplomacy in handwriting. These people, it can be very diplomatic. What's the diplomat? Is that a good or bad trait? It all depends. If you want a job in the State Department, you've got diplomacy all in your handwriting, you're going to be a great person for the front desk. Because what do? Basically lie. What do you think diplomacy is? I mean, you know, here's some Ahmadinejad is coming to this country, right? I mean, here's one of the biggest terrorists in the world. He's out there killing all kinds of people. I mean, if you're gay and you're in his country, there's a good chance you're going to be hung just for being gay. If you're, he's after all kinds of people. Doesn't matter who they are, if they disagree with his philosophy. And my point is that the individual himself, and I'd love to see his handwriting, as a matter of fact, and it won't matter if it's in Arabic or anything else, because you can still see these traits in people's signatures and in their handwriting, and even in different languages. But this guy is a killer, and this is what he does. And you can see this even in gangs, as an example. I've got a school teacher. I taught a class the other night to real estate investors on how to determine whether or not you might want this individual in your life to be a partner or not in your real estate business. So I started showing deceptive strokes and handwriting. And everybody liked it real well. And this school teacher came up to me afterward and said, Derrel, he said, you started talking about these Y's and what they look like down at the bottom, and you showed this really strange-looking Y. And I said, yes. He said, you said that shows up with a lot of gang kids. And I said, yes. He said, I teach in one of the worst schools in Houston, and I know these are gang kids. And he said, and I see these Y's all the time in their handwriting. And I said, yes. And he says, I need your help. And I said, what do you mean? He said, my God, he said, you described that Y, and you said if they do this and it goes this particular direction, he's probably been in the gang for a little while, but he hadn't committed his first murder yet. He said, how do you know when they do the big one? And I said, when that Y does this, and that showed him at the stroke and what it did, that's when it goes up back to the baseline from this direction. That means that he will carry out exactly what he's telling you or what he's looking at you and sneering at you. I said, I wouldn't push him. You may be his first choice. He said, God, he said, I'm telling you, I'm scared to death of some of these kids. And I said, you watch that Y. And I said, if that Y ever goes up to the baseline from that direction, I assure you, he will do you so fast, make your head spin. Because he's already hurt or killed somebody, or you're going to be, he's made the decision to go ahead. He'll carry it out, in other words. Mm-hmm. That's an anger stroke in the worst direction, and it goes back to the baseline, which is the very bottom of all your handwriting. When you write a sentence, that you magically stop, even without you don't have lined paper. You automatically stop, and you could put a ruler underneath your handwriting and say, "Oh my gosh, it's almost level, or it's level across there." That is your baseline, and literally, your subconscious knows exactly where to stop. And anything above that has to do with for the O's and the A's and everything in that middle section. That has to do with your everyday life. Anything way above that, such as your T's and your L's way up there, anything above that, the height of the O's and the D's in the example, that those middle letters, anything above that has to do with your abstract thinking. And what that means simply is that you have these are your, how shall I say it, that your mind reaching literally upward to the common sphere of the everyday into the unknown, such as the spiritual, the philosophical, the theoretical, this sort of thing. That's the stuff up in the high area of the L's and the T's and things like that, way up above in the top part of your handwriting. The lower part beneath that baseline, beneath the bottom of your handwriting, such as where your Y's go way down beneath your J's and things like this, that has to do with the material action or accomplishment. It has to do with money, it has to do with sex, it has to do with socialization, has to do with all those the physicalness of your life, has to do with anything below there. So when I talked about the guy with the gang guy with the special Y, the way he did it, and then he drew it back up to that bottom part of the line, that baseline, that means he'll carry it out. Whatever his intent down there was, he will carry it out. Whatever it was, doesn't matter. It can be sexuality, it can be anything.
So it just shows you patterns. It doesn't say tomorrow this is what's going to happen, or if you are talking to someone, it doesn't tell you that they are necessarily lying in that moment, but they have tendencies toward that kind of behavior.
That is true. But there again, if a person is doing the wise in this particular way, as I mentioned to him, and it goes back toward the baseline but doesn't touch it, the closer it gets there, the closer he's coming to decisions about. And again, if he's in a gang and it's a violent gang, one of the things they usually have you do is beat someone half to death. The first thing they have you do is beat someone half to death. The second thing they have you do is kill someone. And it's often a gang rival. The point is, if you commit murder, you won't testify because you're guilty of the crimes as well. It's a loyalty.
I've been led to believe that in order to do the analysis, it needs to be actually script as opposed to print. Like print. I can't think of the word off the top of my head. Is that a true statement, or can you assess someone's personality or tendencies based on print as well?
You actually can assess print and numbers as an example. These can be done as well. It is more difficult. We have people do script as much as possible. People who print basically are controllers. I talked to a guy that I was doing the Texas Education Agency had me come up for 2 days and do handwriting analysis for their massive annual deal, and they've had me do that before, and they're inviting me up to do it again. And I brought one of my assistants with me, and we did this for 2 days for them, and they were just fascinated. One of the instructors there, she came up to me and said, this is really funny. She says, well, I just want you to know, she had a purse sitting in her lap, and her hands plopped on top of it and looking at me, kind of a little scowl on her face. She said, I think this is the biggest bunch of crap I ever heard, and I don't believe a word of it. And I said, okay. And I said, and? She said, that doesn't upset you? I said, no, ma'am. I said, handwriting analysis, handwriting is brain writing, period. It's your brain writing. It's not your hand. It's your brain. And I said, she said, well, I don't think it's going to be accurate. And I said, if it's not accurate, it's only because I wasn't effective. It wasn't because, in other words, it's the analyst is the problem there, not the writer. I said, do you understand it? She said, okay, let's see if I'm any good. She started writing. She wrote me about a page. And I looked at it and I said, how truthful you want me to be? And she laughed and said, I don't believe any of it anyway, so be as truthful as you want. And I said, okay. I said, you have huge resentment in your life right now, and it's someone very close to you, and it's to the point it's affecting your life. And she just broke down and started crying. She said, oh, my God, how do you know that? And I said, it's all over your handwriting, young lady. And she said, my mother has Alzheimer's. She just moved in with us, and she's getting abusive. I have to take care of her. I have to work. I have to take care of my family. And I said, that's called resentment. It's all over your handwriting. I said, the problem is you're tearing your family up, and you're probably harming your mother because of the fact that you're not doing the right thing. I said, why don't you put her in a special care place? And she said, well, I didn't want to because I said, I understand your rationale, but it's causing you huge resentment and probably causing problem for your family and even less good care for your mother. And she said, that is true. She cried and then says, oh, my God, I can't believe how accurate this is. And I said, well, even if I missed it, I said it would have been me. The handwriting is still what it is. It still has its information. I said, if I'm accurate or any analyst is accurate, I said, they're going to really surprise you.
See, I've decided that mine just says I have Alzheimer's because I don't necessarily write entire words.
Well, I told my brother he had Alzheimer's. He said, what's that? And I said, well, it's not Alzheimer's, it's a drinking problem. You have Alzheimer's. You drink too much.
I think that's fascinating. I mean, the gang thing, it didn't really hit home, but in this story, I think it's fascinating that our handwriting actually changes based on what's going on in our lives, which makes me think, okay, so if I looked at it, if like someone like you compared my handwriting from a year ago or 5 years ago or whatever to now, you would be able to see changes in my life.
Because your thinking changed. Handwriting is brain writing. Now, you want to have a little fun?
Sure.
I had a friend of mine, I say friend, it's an acquaintance, and she she got sued in a massive lawsuit as a therapist, and she wanted me to come up and work with her, and up in Colorado. And I agreed, and I said, well, tell me what you want done, and put it in handwriting. And she did, and sent it to me. And people said, well, why in the world did you do that? And I said, well, number one, it's your handwriting, it's your brain writing. And they said, so what does that mean? I said, well, what that simply means is I can look at her handwriting, and I'd like to know I'm, number one, going to get paid. Yeah. As a second, I said I look at the handwriting, and I find I want to know a lot of things about the individual before I go up to work with her. I want to know if she's going to be truthful with me, or am I wasting my trip? I want to know a lot of things about the individual. And I said that handwriting, and it did, and it told me a lot. And a lot of it was very positive and very, very good. And some of it was pretty radically negative, and that's the part that got her sued, actually. And so that told me what we needed to work on from a therapy point of view. When you're looking at one of the things that the lady wanted to do beside the therapy and all the other stuff, she claimed she had all these previous lives. And I said, okay. She says, you believe in reincarnation? I said, no, but that doesn't mean anything. I said, that it doesn't make it true or not true just because I don't particularly agree with it. And I said, I think race memory and other things explain things like that far better. She said, no, I've lived in different lives, and I even did handwriting when I went into altered states of me in previous lives. And I said, great, let me see your handwriting. And she said, see how different it is? And I said, yeah, that's pretty neat. And she said, well, I want you to, tonight, whenever you leave, I want you to do a handwriting analysis on those and tell me what I was like in my previous lives. And she dated the lives and when she was there. And I looked at her handwriting, it's all the same handwriting. I said, there's nothing, I said, it's just changing your slant, a bit of emotion here and there and so on. I said, but your handwriting pretty much is the same. I said, it's you. I said, there's no radical difference, or there's nothing. I said, what's amazing to me is you lived all these different lives, like in France and China and all these other places, and you didn't write Chinese. You didn't write in French. You didn't have the tendencies that would be present in anyone of that era and age. I said, do you see why I'm having a problem with that? And boy, she didn't like that at all. Hey,
no, but that's a great one. That's a great one.
We were at a party one night after a UFO conference. This lady, there was about 10 different people there, and this one lady looked at me and says, now, Mr. Sands, we want to ask you some questions about yourself. And I said, okay. She said, do you believe in reincarnation? I said, no, ma'am. And she looked at me like I was unenlightened at that point. And I said, she said, well, why not? And I said, well, for a lot of reasons, but the least of which, now some of the things I already just said. And she said, then finally she looked at me, and to the shock of most everybody sitting at the table, she says, well, I don't care what you say. You and I were in love and married in the previous life. And I was Queen Nefertiti. And I said, well, you know, I've met about a half a dozen Queen Nefertitis already, and I can't figure out which one of you is really her. You know what I mean? I said, I can't figure out why you guys always end up some famous person and nobody ever ended up Hitler. Why did you always get to be somebody famous? And you get married to me, as an example, and I don't know anything about it. And I said, I just have one question for you. She says, what's that? And I said, was it as good for you as good for me as it was for you? Oh, she got mad. She swelled up like a bullfrog, sat there and never said another word. And everybody just laughed and laughed and laughed. I thought it was funny myself.
That was pretty funny.
I thought so.
What is the highest profiles person, you know, celebrity, political guy, handwriting that you've gotten to evaluate? And not necessarily from a word point of view, but I'm just being a little nosy.
Oh, it's just some of them I obviously can't mention, but I can tell you about some of them I did. Every time we have a new presidential running, I'll go through a lot of their handwriting, and as I will when we get down to the final numbers of the final Democratic and final Republican ones, and handwriting. And the last one I did like that was was Bill Clinton and Bob Dole, and I noticed their signature that they had in that particular time was very heavy, and Bill Clinton's was not only just extremely heavy, it was what we call muddy. Muddy means like if you had a fountain pen, and you're writing on a real soft paper, and the ink kind of spreads a little bit, because what they're doing, they're pressing down very heavy, and it allows the ink to spread. And people who have muddy handwriting have extremely inordinate sexual drives. I mean, they're out off the chart like that. And I saw that in Bill Clinton's handwriting, and somebody said, "Well, what does that mean to you?" And I said, "I wouldn't leave him alone with my grandmother." And of course, later everybody found, he got accused of out running around with all these women. Good night. They were coming out of the woodwork trying to sue him, and of course, and all of that, and of course, Monica Lewinsky and all that. But it shows up in his handwriting. None of that surprised me in the least. I'm not picking on it. I'm just saying it was there, and just to make sure your audience knows that I'm not trying to be biased here. I looked at Bob Dole's handwriting. His was extremely heavy and just a slight bit muddy. Not a whole lot, but nothing like Clinton's. But again, what did Bob Dole advertise for?
Viagra.
Exactly.
Alice, one of them.
Yeah, it's Viagra. And so, man, I'll tell you, this is hilarious. But there's all kinds of stuff you can see in people's handwriting. I look at a lot of Earth, Wind, and Fire, the handwriting signatures of many of these people. I'll look at their original signatures and then photograph it, and John Belushi and people like that, and I'll look at theirs, and whenever I teach some of these classes, I'll show people suicidal tendencies and some of these remarkable. The best example I can give you right off, and it's a heartbreaker, is Michael Jackson. Everybody asked the big question: was he really a pedophile? Of course, he's a pedophile. It's in his handwriting. And they said, well, but I said, don't think I'm picking on him because he's dead or because they. I said the first couple of times he got tagged for pedophilia, he was guilty. I said the last case, in my opinion, that family set him up and put that kid in there alone with him, knowing what was going to happen, and just to get the money. They didn't want a lawsuit. They didn't want a court case. They wanted the money, and notice that they settled. And the whole point of that is that they were using what they knew against him, and they set their own kid. What they did was criminally negligent against their own child. But pedophilia, this sort of thing, will show up in the person's handwriting.
Has the assessment of handwriting ever been used as part of a court proceeding? Has a handwriting analyst, other than for like forgery, because I could see why you would want to have a document examiner or a handwriting expert, but for talking about things like Michael Jackson and him being a pedophile, has that ever been used as some evidence to support a case?
It has, and I give you some better examples for that. In most of the time, when you're going in for let's say a high level murder case, and like the lady that responsible for the death of her daughter here a while back, the big case in Florida, a good example. Whenever you go in there and they're going to do jury selection, you probably don't know this, but the jury, each of the two attorneys on both sides, most of the time they will have a handwriting analyst looking at the handwriting of each and every one of those potential jurors. And in those jurors, and I do this myself, you look at certain traits, and then it tells you whether you're the defense or not, as to whether or not you want that particular person. In other words, if you have somebody who has very strong views, and they're very moralistic and pretty good people, and so to speak, but very strong in their views, that might not go well for you in a case like this lady, because of what she did, and whereas you'd rather other people maybe to give her a break. So you're looking for these type strengths and weaknesses in people to determine, and they do this, they will literally fill out a form on each one of these jurors, and they'll hand it to the attorney, and the attorney will make that as part of his determination of whether or not you're going to be chosen as a juror or not. They'll be looking at your handwriting. I assure you they're looking at your handwriting. That analysis has already been done by someone in that room, and they're reading it right there. And for instance, if you're an unsavory attorney, you got a case that's your guy's guilty of sin, but you need to do something else with the case, take it another direction. There's obvious the type people you need are people you can sway, and that's the kind of people you're looking for. And you get a certain amount of people that you get to say you get to discount 12 people, and maybe the other side gets to discount 12 people, and then you have to accept the rest of them. So that's what they do on both sides. That's how juries actually come about.
But let me ask the question again. As far as the court proceedings, other than a forgery case or something like that, has handwriting analysis been used as evidence in a case, or someone like yourself be called to testify to a person's personality with relationship to a case?
They may have. I've not been involved in those cases. What I've been involved in is where, so the case doesn't go to court. In other words, if forgery is involved, and I've done, in the last 3 years, I've done 2 cases involving fake wills that the real will disappeared, and then all of a sudden, magically, here comes the real will. And in both cases, they were both forgeries. And my point is that in those cases, the judge simply reviewed the evidence and simply tossed the case, just threw it out.
Looking at the clock. Is this something that you do, if somebody has a case like this where they think something's a forgery, or they, I don't know, they want to know something about somebody else? I mean, is this something that they can hire you to do? I mean,
of course. And the even more fun illustration is you can even, and we'll talk about that in the next section, you can take a person and actually hypnotize them and have them write, let's say regress them back to the age of 10, regress them back to the age of 10, and have them write at that current age, and their handwriting will change to the brain that they were using at that time.
That's
handwriting
kind of interesting.
It's great. It's amazing stuff.
What's the weirdest case you've ever done or worked on?
One of the weirder ones was, you remember the fake alien autopsy film that was so popular for so long?
Hey, that wasn't fake. It was real.
Yeah. What was really amusing about that whole thing was all the time while all this was going on behind the scenes, I had been the original paperwork on the canisters what so-called real film was. And I have the signatures and the handwriting of the so-called real guy who had the real stuff originally. And I determined that it was fraud. And that was the first thing. And then second is Santilli himself, the guy who had the film originally. I met with Reg Presley, who some people may not know, but Reg Presley is of the Trogs. Their famous singer sang Love Is All Around and Wild Thing. Anyway, they went to there was a birthday party for Reg Presley, the leader of the Trogs, and he took me while I was in London to meet Santilli, and we all had a little party there for Reg Presley. And I told him I was going to see if I could get Santilli to give me some of the actual film. And he says he wouldn't give his mother the film. And I said, he'll give me film. He said he won't. Long story short, when I finished with Santilli actually gave me some of the film of the I had this film long before anybody ever examined any of it. And I proved through the York University in Canada that film was in fact not consistent with the age that they were trying to promote it as in the alien autopsy. In fact, we actually knew before they ever told anybody who the guys were that actually faked the film to begin with. But the signatures on the film were not consistent. The information, it was fraud. It was fraud.
What's going to happen with everybody? Nobody writes anymore. Everybody types, everybody texts. Then what happens?
Wonderful question. People say, well, we text, we use computers and so on. And I said, but look at what's happening to your children. They are out of control. They are literally losing chunks of their life. They're having huge difficulties in school and so on. A lot of them are dropping out at unbelievable rates. And I said the reason is you're no longer remember, handwriting is brain writing. Now you're no longer even doing hand writing. So what structures is your brain now going to follow? Well, anything that gets in there. Well, there are certain patterns that your brain needs to follow. And there are certain things. There are speed limits and things like that down the highway. You may not like them, and some people break them occasionally. But my point is, if there weren't any, and you could drive anywhere you wanted, any direction you wanted, either side of the road you wanted, or anything else, it would be absolute chaos. This is what's happening to your young children right now. They're no longer using the Palmer method of handwriting that you and I were taught when we were in school.
My kids barely learned how to write in script. They were told that they should print. Because the teacher doesn't understand and have a clue. Printing goes back to control, or people who are out of control or who demand more control in their life and they don't have it. That's what printing's about. It's not. So you would think it'd be the other way, Catholic school. Your S's look like this.
And it's okay for people to structure your handwriting in the beginning because that's giving you a format. Whenever you learn the format, you will automatically write the correct way. In other words, your brain will start its own writing at that point after you learn how to write. Then magically, you will slant the right way. You will do your different things will happen in your handwriting. That's you developing in handwriting. That's your brain. That's what it looks like. The first part's training. It's just learning how to write. After that, you'll develop your own style.
So you add personality onto it.
That your personality will show up in the handwriting. It's all there.
What about somebody, we only have a couple of minutes, but what about somebody that actually does have handwriting that looks like what they teach in school?
There are people like that. Most of those people, you can't tell the age or sex of a person by their handwriting, but one of the hints that I usually get is if I see someone has perfect little handwriting like that and have these large little circles over their eye, instead of a dot, they'll have a circle. The person's usually about 13, 14 years old. They're in puberty. It's female, and they want to be noticed. They're no longer your buddy. They realize that they're a young lady now, and they want to be noticed. Marilyn Monroe still had those in her handwriting, but she'd make a big heart over her eye. The big heart meant that she wanted to be loved and needed to be loved and couldn't find anyone that really loved her. It's just a heartbreaking story.
And so I guess if you have no dot, that means you just don't want to be noticed?
That's inattention to details.
Oh. All right, well, the music is going to come up, and we're going to take a break and come back and talk about hypnosis. You just know too much stuff, Derrel.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's a good thing. Webpage, alienhunter.org, so if they want to contact you because they want to get information about their handwriting, blah, 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 I'm thinking. Correct?
OperationAlienDNA.com.
All right. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.
inside yourself and venture into the realm of the unconscious mind with my Meditating on the Kabbalah guided imagery audio CDs. Discover who you are and what you want in life. Meditating on the Kabbalah can help you to open, clear, and revitalize the energetic pathways of your subtle being. They will support you in your spiritual quest by helping you to access the profound insights and inner guidance you need as you work in alignment with your highest good. Let them help you to release negative thoughts and emotions and clear away any limitations that may keep you from experiencing your full potential. Walk down the path to health, healing, understanding, and